Welcome to Module 7 of the ETEP online training series. I'm looking forward to getting going today because it's focused on implementation, and this is where the true power of the EPA-Tribal Environmental Plan process that we've been developing. This is where I'm going to show you what I believe is the true power of managing your office on a day-to-day basis. So here's the same disclaimer that I provided for all the other webinars, stating that this workshop is not endorsed or sponsored by the EPA. And just briefly to show you where we've come from. So Module 2, we focused on the requirements, understanding what an ETEP is. Module 2 is focused on scoping and some initial information gathering. Module 3 went from information gathering to developing the strategic work plan. Module 4 was a Q&A session, also focused on some common objectives. Module 5, we went through the process of developing a strategic plan. Module 6, we went through all the steps to finalize a complete ETEP. And then today is really about implementation, and then next module, next Thursday, I believe it is going to be a final session. It will be question and answer opportunity, but I will go through some content if there are not enough questions to fill the time. Okay, so we're going to start today by just re-reviewing the course resources and logistics. And as I mentioned, this is going to be focused on implementing a completed ETEP and strategic plan, specifically or focusing most on the ETEP strategic work plan, which I have been saying is a strategic management system. So we'll go through each of these topics, including viewing and tracking objectives, management of staff, gaining buy-in and communicating what's in your plan, utilizing this for decision making, using your ETEP strategic work plan to prepare your GAP and other grant work plans, and then the process of reviewing and updating your strategic work plan and your strategic plan. And then after that, just rehash the assignments and next steps. And then I do ask you to complete the webinar at the evaluation at the end to help me improve and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so we only have one more, so there actually will be no more doodle polls. The last module is set for next Thursday, and I will be sending a reminder email about registering for that. And the resources and videos are still available and will continue to be available for at least another year or so. So you can access all these at any time. All of these webinars are recorded. The catalogs, the materials, the templates, all these things are in the Google Drive folder. And then there'll only be another week or so of ongoing emails for the course. All right, so one of the first things I want to go through that you can do with your ETEP strategic work plan is just the ability to view and track objectives. I'm going to be focusing on using the spreadsheet format of this. You can do some of this stuff in the non-spreadsheet version, so if you use the Word version as well, actually you can do pretty much all of it in terms of actually like using it and seeing it and tracking it. You just won't be able to do it as quickly or easily as you would be able to in a spreadsheet. So one thing that's going to be particularly helpful with this plan that you've now developed, the ETEP strategic work plan in particular, is the ability to quickly sort and filter objectives by year, by program area, and by staff member, or whatever you want to see it by, in just a few clicks of a button. So you can focus on exactly what you want to focus on, and you can use this to track the accomplishment of the objectives as well. So that's really kind of one of the main purposes of this whole plan. It's one of the EPA's main purposes, is to be able to kind of track the accomplishment of the tribe's goals and objectives, what type of progress is being made. It'll help you manage moving forward. And then you also have the opportunity to sort and filter your program goals, descriptions, and your plans to manage authorized environmental programs as well. So I'm just going to quickly demonstrate how to do these. I've shown some of this before, so let me make this a little bit bigger. I've adjusted the size of some of this to make it a little easier, and I've actually hidden some unnecessary columns as well. Actually, let me just unhide those columns. So what this looked like before, I actually kind of was messing with it before. This was wider. So let's say that you want to focus on just your water related activities. You're meeting with somebody to discuss water related stuff. So you can filter all this out and just focus on that. If you have the paper version or the Word document version of this, then these will already, the way at least I've shown you to set this up, you would actually have a separate document just focused on water. So they would already be organized by program area. You just would have less ability to then sort and filter in other ways as well. But in the Word document version, there should be a separate document for each program area, and then there should be a separate list series for each year. So in this case, as I mentioned, to make it a little easier to see everything, you may want to shrink down this column right here. One thing you may want to do too as well is if you're trying to just quickly look at these things and look at what's critical information for you to look at, you may want to hide certain columns. So these are things that are required. The capacity indicator numbers and the roles are required for the EPA, but you don't necessarily need to see them all the time, so let's hide those. The repeat, I'm recommending keeping on, and there's some other ones. Actually, I think there's some other columns that were already hidden in here as well. So let's unhide these real quick. So there's all these other columns right here. These are more optional ones. For the purposes of the demonstrations today, I'm going to hide all these. These aren't populated with any information anyway, so let's hide these so that we can see some other stuff more readily. So now we can see, this probably is a little too small for everybody to see, but we can see all staff members right now, but let's make it a little larger. Okay, so now we filtered it out. We're just looking at air. Let's say we only look at 2016 air-related stuff, so now we filtered out all the non-2016, and then if we just want to truly focus on air, let's filter this, the plans to manage authorized environmental programs as well. So one thing you could do is, let's say you want to focus on just who has primary responsibility over, you want to focus on a staff member who has primary responsibility, then you could unfilter these. Let's say as a director, you want to see everything you have primary responsibility over. You could just focus on ED and then just look at your responsibilities for 2016. So it's a quick way to kind of filter and sort and look at exactly what you want to look at real quickly. All right, so let me unfilter these guys, clear all these filters. And we don't have to bother about the last one. Oops, wrong one. So this will be particularly helpful for is if you fill in the information or a sufficient amount of information, then you can really use this as a tool to manage staff. You can use it as a tool to manage staff anyways. It's just you'll have more ability if you actually fill in the staff members and the work years. I'm going to go through that now. And the staff management aspect of this is optional. This is not required by the EPA. It'll take a little more work to fill this in, but it can be very worthwhile if you do so. I'm going to talk about when and how to do that in a moment. So what I mean is, in terms of managing staff responsibilities, within the spreadsheet itself, you can assign a primary responsibility for each objective amongst your staff members. So you have a point person for every single of the 1-year objectives. And so you know who to go to and kind of discussing what's the status of a particular objective. So you want to review these and make adjustments as needed when you're initially developing the plan and then repeating that process on an ongoing basis. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a moment. So you also can populate your ETEP strategic work plan with staff work years. You can put the specific number of estimated hours or work years for each objective and assign, for each staff member. When you do this, you definitely want to do this with your staff members. So one thing you can do is instead of, as a director, you may want to look through the objectives and just come up with what you think the best estimates are. Uh, you may actually want to have your staff themselves go through the list of objectives and have them estimate how many hours that they think is each particular objective is going to take. I recommend a combination of both. If you have your staff do it, you definitely want to be reviewing that with them and making adjustments as needed. And if you choose as a director to populate this yourself, then you want to then go back and talk with each of your staff members to discuss the amount of time that you've allocated for them for each objective. And then as you have that discussion, when you're reviewing these, you want to make adjustments as needed, both in the beginning and then in subsequent stages later on. And then I showed this, actually I didn't show this before. Pivot tables, if you know what these are, can be particularly helpful in quickly calculating the total work years per staff member. You can do this other ways. I'm actually going to provide some bonus videos on top of the webinar series that have specific instructional videos of how to do some of these specific things I'm talking about in this training video, and utilizing pivot tables is one of them as well. Just keep in mind that the things I'm doing in the spreadsheet, I'm using Microsoft Excel 2016, so you may have a different version of Excel, or it's possible you may not actually have Excel. You could actually do most of the same things in either other versions or in Google Documents, which is a free online program as well. Most spreadsheet programs will have most of these filtering and sorting capabilities. And then you don't need to use all this stuff as well. So this whole staff management thing is an optional thing, but it can be particularly helpful and powerful. So I recommend, if you do choose to populate your ETEP strategic work plan spreadsheet with your staff responsibilities and work years, well, not even if you don't do that, you can utilize the objectives themselves for regular group and individual staff meetings. So you can filter these like I was doing before for an applicable year or per staff member or for program area, and then you have those objectives to review and discuss with the staff member or staff members that are present to talk about the status of the assigned objectives, to evaluate and make adjustments as needed. Another option too is that staff can create individualized plans with more detail. So staff members can take all the objectives that they've seen that they have responsibilities for, not just primary responsibilities, but if they have a support role as well, put this in their own document so they can keep an eye on all the objectives they're responsible for, and add in some additional details as well. So there may be, these are annual objectives we're talking about, and there may be a series of steps to accomplish it. So your staff member may choose to add in additional tasks or details to flesh that out. And so let me now show you what this means in action. So we're really focusing here on the objectives worksheet of this. And so that's where you have the year, the objective, the program area. And so in this column O right here, I have a column that's called primary staff responsibility. And so in this fictitious tribal environmental program, so these are all acronyms for the different titles. So ED would be environmental director, AQS is going to be your air quality specialist, WQS your water quality specialist, you'll have an environmental technician as ET, and then AA is the administrative assistant. So this environmental department includes 5 staff members. And so for each objective, and you go back over here, all these objectives right now, these are in alphabetical, these are sorted by year and then by area. So they're in alphabetical order. So air is going to come up first, and as probably makes sense. I mean, this is all, I made this up. This is all fictional. based on my prior experience working with other tribes, working with the Chumash, just in terms of like what particular staff members might have what particular responsibilities. So while it's fictional, it probably you have some of these same objectives and some of these same staff members. But so your air quality specialist likely is going to have the primary responsibility for most of the air related objectives. So if you go down here, you go through the air ones, you see that AQS is associated with each of them. The air quality specialist also has the primary responsibility for some of the climate change related stuff. The environmental director has the progress reporting related primary responsibility, developing an annual education outreach plan. Administrative assistant has the primary responsibility for developing procedures for notifying community members of environmental concerns. So you go through these and you have to sign primary staff responsibilities. These aren't set in stone. These are just meant to guide you. So as you flesh these, as you populate these, you just realize you can change them later on. So one thing I was noticing down here was, I had it where the environmental director had the primary responsibility for submitting progress reports and financial reports and grant drawdown requests for the air program. It may be where you want your air quality specialist to have this primary responsibility, or you want this to be your administrative assistant's primary responsibility to handle all reporting related matters. It doesn't mean that other staff members won't be involved. You're just assigning a point person who's going to be, keep track of this and have the primary responsibility for making sure it actually gets done. Okay, so then to the right of this, I've actually there are a number of work years that have been assigned for each staff member for each responsibility. So we're staying here on the this first objective is to conduct an indoor air quality assessment, prepare a report, and then develop an indoor air quality management plan. That's a pretty significant task. In fact, it might be something where if that's one of the tasks or one of the objectives you develop initially, you may want to break that up into separate objectives and maybe even spread them out over 2 years. So one thing might be like you may want to conduct an indoor air quality assessment and prepare a report, but you may want to develop the indoor air quality management plan in a subsequent year. So that's one way you can modify this plan as well. As we move right into columns P through T, this is where we have the estimated work years for each staff member. So for this assessment, we have the environmental director is estimated to be spending 80 hours on this project. So up in this formula bar right here, hopefully you can see that okay. So the way I've calculated work years was by estimating hours, the number of hours I think the particular objective will take for that, the number of hours that staff member will spend working on that objective divided by, over the total number of hours in a work year. So in this case, it's estimated that the environmental director will be spending 80 hours, and then there are an estimated 2,080 hours in a work year. That is actually just that's 40 hours a week times 52 hours or times 52 weeks in a year. Maybe something where if you have part-time staff, actually, if you have part-time staff, you still use the same formula. So you want to use the same formula in general. You realizing that you may not, in an ideal world, you only work 40 hours a week. But also, too, another consideration is that, there is vacation time. Hopefully, you have vacation time that you're taking, or PTO or sick leave. So you're not necessarily working 40 hours a week every single week. Some you may be working more, some you may be working less. In my experience, at least most environmental directors, if not other staff members, are probably working more than 40 hours a week, for better or for worse. But so that's how you calculate and get the estimated number of work years. And the reason I just didn't just do hours and did work years is because usually in your work plans, you need to report work years, your GAP grant and other grant work plans. So this has been estimated where the air quality specialist is actually going to be spending 400 hours on doing these tasks. So that's a significant amount of time. 400 hours is about 20% of all of the working time. So they're going to be spending a significant portion of their time in 2016 on this indoor air quality assessment and management plan. We don't have the water quality specialist or environmental technician involved in this case, and there's no time assigned for the administrative assistant. That may be something you want to evaluate. Perhaps the administrative assistant could be helpful in accomplishing this as well. So you go through and you assign your primary staff responsibilities and then estimated work years for each objective, for each program area. I just did it for 2016. I'm going to explain why. You don't necessarily want to do it for the full plan. I'll explain why more in a moment. It's good to see it's good to see how many work years are spent on each objective, but you know, you each staff member has a limited number of work years they're going to be able to spend in a given year. So, in this scenario, all these 5 staff members are all full-time staff members, but your administrative assistant may be part-time. They may work at 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. Your water quality specialist might be going on maternity leave, your environmental technician may work 4 days a week. So you want to factor in these things as well, in terms of how much time you're allocating for them. So one thing I mentioned was you can actually sum up this information really quickly in a pivot table. So one thing you could do is if you wanted to see how many work years your air quality specialist is working on activities in a given year, is you could, go like this. You could go all the way down to the bottom of the whole table. And this is like, kind of the old-fashioned way to do it, but you could just, go down here and, you could just hit sum. You could go down here and let's see. Yeah, so let's do that. And, you could do that and then just like calculate the sum total. What I'm going to do right here is actually, let's see. So let's do sum. Let's do from this bottom cell all the way to the top cell. And then just by doing that quickly, you can see that, since I've only populated it for 2016, then you have currently your air quality specialist only has 0.979 work years designated for all the objectives. So that may be a good kind of buffer, if they're taking vacation time and they don't work, they kind of stick to 40 hours or so. That's good. I would actually prefer to try to get as close to 2080 as possible and realize you're probably going to underestimate the time on things. But so that's one, that's kind of, I would say, the manual way to calculate these. The way that I like to do it, if you know how to do this, is actually using pivot tables. So you can create a pivot table. As I mentioned, I've shown you a demonstration video on that. And I'll just refresh it to make sure it's the latest data. So this actually shows the sum of all the work years for each staff member. And then one thing you can do is you can actually go back and make adjustments. So right here it says that the administrative assistant is estimated to work 0.86 work year. So if they're a full-time staff member, then when you're going through this process of assigning responsibilities for each of the objectives, you'll see that you perhaps could be utilizing your administrative assistant, give your administrative assistant a little more work. Looking at the environmental director, 1.24, that seems about accurate, but you may want to choose to reallocate some of that responsibilities, maybe to your administrative assistant or other staff members. In general, this looks like a pretty overworked office. So this is a way for you to evaluate the objectives in a given work year to see if you've given yourself too much or too little work per staff member. So you may choose, because you have an extra quarter of a work year, so your environmental director is expected to work a full year and a quarter worth of, supposed to complete a full year and a quarter's worth of objectives in 1 year. You may choose to move some of the 2016 objectives back into 2017 instead to make sure that you aren't stretching yourself too thin. One thing you want to keep in mind too is that things come up throughout the year. like you had this great plan, but then life happens and now things change. Somebody goes on medical leave, you discover some environmental issues out in the field that require immediate attention, so they're going to require a significant amount of time. So, you got to be flexible in this as well. So this is just kind of a planning tool for you. But just going back to this example of the indoor air quality assessment, and also keeping in mind that the administrative assistant uh, has some room to work with, you may choose. So going back here, we can see that the administrative assistant has 0.86 work years. So let's go over here and let's say, well, you know what? I bet you the administrative assistant really could be helpful on this project and doing some research. Let's say that they're going to work, 40 hours on this project, um, that particular project to help out. So going back over here, they're at 0.86 before. You can refresh this pivot table, and now they're at 0.88. So you can make these adjustments on the fly, tweak it, and then kind of see. This helps you kind of prioritize and assign responsibilities. So I think it's pretty helpful. All right, so I mentioned too that this is very helpful for your meetings. Let me just see what's over here as well. Let's go talk about that in a moment. So you want to utilize this for first preparing your work plan initially, but also this can be particularly helpful for group and individual staff meetings. So let's start off by kind of providing an example staff meeting. Let's say you're meeting with your air quality specialist. You do monthly meetings, your air quality specialist, to discuss how things are going, to make sure everybody's on the same page with everything. So let's go back here. So all the filters are cleared right now. So there's two things you want to keep in mind. So there are the tasks the air quality specialist has primary responsibility, and you can filter everything out. So in this case, let's say we're focused on just the 2016 activities your air quality specialist is involved in. The thing is your air quality specialist is maybe involved in other activities that they don't have the primary responsibility for. So, and when you meet with them, you probably want to discuss all their responsibilities. So let's unfilter this, and instead let's filter out where they don't have a responsibility. So I'm going down here and I'm filtering out the blank. So if whichever objectives the air quality specialist does not have any estimated hours for will be filtered out. And let's see, we're going to filter this out so it's just in 2016 right now. I think that's, I've only populated it for 2016. So now we can go through all these, and this is, you can see, the air quality specialist has some responsibility for all these things. And then in the meeting, you can go through these objectives one by one and say, okay, where are we at with the indoor air quality assessment? Your air quality specialist can say, this is exactly where we are, show you the draft of things, talk about what issues are going on, and say, whether they think they're going to be able to get things done on time. So it might be where your air quality specialist says, you know what, this is a whole lot of work. The assessment and preparing the report's a whole lot of work. I don't think I'm going to be able to actually develop the management plan this year. So then you may want to make an adjustment on the fly, and then adjust this particular objective right here to remove the indoor air quality management plan, and then assign it for the next year as well. And then you can flesh out the rest of it later on. Assign the categories and all that other stuff as well. So you can make some adjustments on the fly, but it's particularly helpful because you can see everything right here that the air quality specialist has on their plate. And if they develop their own plan, they may have some specific deadlines. They may have they may be able to break this up into quarters. But you can go through all the objectives. Right here, they're gonna be working on drafting and adopting an air quality ordinance. So that may be something that you want to check on the status of that. There's going to be education outreach, some reporting, air quality monitoring, all the things your air quality specialist is doing that year are in this document, and you can discuss these, and you look at the same exact document every meeting. So you're on the same page all the time. You are looking at the same roadmap, the same blueprint, it's not ambiguous what the responsibilities are for your air quality specialists. And if you properly involve your air quality specialists in the beginning of this process, they should feel comfortable with the number of objectives that they're working on for a particular year. And so if you have to make tweaks and adjustments, it should be minor. So this is an ongoing management process that makes your job as a director a lot easier. You don't have to remember everything. You have it all in this document. And as a staff member, it's very clear to you what your responsibilities are in a given year. So the same thing applies for, let's clear this filter out. The same thing applies for group staff meetings as well. You may want to look at, let's say that you want to focus in a staff meeting on the general activities, your education outreach activities. For a given staff meeting, you can change this, and then your waste management activities. So this staff meeting is going to focus on these particular activities, but this is an all hands on deck staff meeting. And you may cycle through program areas just because you don't want to look at all of them in every meeting, because it's just could probably be too much information to look at. So you probably want to focus on just maybe one or just a few topic areas at a time. If you meet on a weekly basis, you can focus on one at a time. If you meet on um, if you meet on a monthly basis, you may want to focus on a few. You could also populate things like deadlines. You can actually just focus on what the close deadlines are. But this is for you as a management tool. But you do want to be looking at all these things on a regular basis. So in this case, we're looking at the education outreach activities. We're going to discuss this as staff, talk about where we're at. One thing that actually may be particularly helpful is actually focusing on the activities where there are multiple crossover responsibilities. I don't have that set up right now to do so, but there are ways you could actually manipulate this spreadsheet, and when there are any crossover responsibilities, you could actually have it filter and just show those things as well. So you talk about all these activities, and everybody has the same roadmap. Everybody has the same plan. Everybody knows what's going on. They know what their responsibilities are. So this is helpful for both individual and individual and group staff meetings. So I'm going to go back here and just undo some of those adjustments I made before. Let's just unfilter this so we can move on. Okay. So as I mentioned, I only populated the work years for the current year. So I had them just for 2016. And we know as you're populating it for a given year, you want to be consistent. So if you're working off a fiscal year, then just make sure that all the objectives themselves are kind of based on a fiscal year and your timing's based on a fiscal year. Or if you're working a calendar year, just be consistent between the two. Just choose one or the other. Because the thing is if you're working on both a fiscal and calendar year, you're actually working over a 15-month period instead of possibly working over a 15-month period, or even longer, depending. Most fiscal years, the federal fiscal years, ends in September. But if you have like state grants, that those may operate on the state fiscal year, which may be actually July. Start on July 1st. So you want to be consistent, so you actually are working on a single year instead of actually 15 months, so you can see what the responsibilities are for a full work year instead of more than a full work year. One thing you'll want to do is populate the responsibilities and work years for the upcoming year, and I recommend doing this when you're preparing your corresponding grant proposals. I'll talk a little more about this in a moment, but actually I don't think I'm touching upon this too much. The best time to work on this and update all of these things is going to be when you're developing your work plans for next year, because you'll be doing the same thing. So I do have on the agenda to go through preparing a grant work plan, so I'll show you more what that looks like in a moment. So as I mentioned, this really can be used to guide all progress in strategy meetings. So you may have kind of regular staff meetings, and then you may have like ones that are focused on just strategy as well. This should be present and be the main focus of all those meetings. One thing you want to consider too are the next year's objectives for pursuing funding. So when you're meeting with your air quality specialists, looking at 2016 objectives, you may actually want to be looking at 2017 objectives as well, because pursuing funding for some of those objectives is going to be one of the things you have to do this year. So in this plan right here, I didn't actually populate stuff, let's see. Let's just focus on the air one again, just focusing on the air quality specialist. So in 2017, there are activities as well that you need to get funding for, and I didn't actually, this isn't very robust. But let's say, it was instead of this 2018, this is a 2017, and you are going to pursue TAS, or Treatment as State Status for Tribal Air Quality Standards. Well, you're going to need to apply for funding for that in 2016. So you want to keep those things on your radar as well and assign sufficient amount of time to apply for that funding. So in 2016, I always, I have kind of a catch-all objective of identify, pursue, and secure funding. This says, does see combined annual funding. Let's conceive combined annual funding plan. So you don't necessarily need to look at all the 2017 objectives. If you prepared a funding plan based on the 2017 objectives in a separate document, then you just make sure you're looking at that document as well to make sure that let's say you're operating on a Clean Air Act 103 grant, and you actually want to, and that's more for like an introductory air quality program. You want to transition to a Clean Air Act 105 grant. You think there'll be more money. You think you can do more. You have more flexibility. So if that's the case, you want to be aware of what those deadlines are. You want to make sure that whoever's involved in preparing the application is allocating sufficient amount of time or has sufficient amount of time to do so. You want to make sure that when you're meeting regularly, you're keeping those things in mind, keeping those things on your radar too. Okay, so let's undo these filters. So another thing too is you could decide that you want to complete an objective a year earlier if there is sufficient time and resources to do so. You may want to periodically look at next year's objectives and even future objectives to see if your air quality specialist or your environmental technician or somebody got something done in a lot less time or a lot earlier, and it looks like they have some room on their plate for some new projects and responsibilities, and you have the funding to you have the funding to work on something new, then you may choose to look at some future activities and begin working on them now. But ultimately, the goal is to keep everybody in alignment with the goals and objectives that are in your plan. So everybody's on the same page and knows what's going on. You don't have people who are working on, going off in tangents, working on things that aren't important. As a director, you're not reacting to whatever seems the most urgent or whatever, you're not reacting to the squeaky wheel, the person who brings up the most stuff. You can keep all your goals, you keep all of your objectives in context, so you can make sure you're allocating your personnel, your time, and other, funding and other resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. All right, so another very useful thing for your ETEP strategic work plan, useful function is communicating and gaining support. So you want to use this plan to communicate with leaders and stakeholders and hopefully gain their buy-in for projects and activities. You may need their involvement, you may need information, you may need funding. So it's best if you have, if they're aware of what's going on and they support it and they're bought into it as well. And this plan allows you to do so. And I'll show you some ways to do that in a moment. You want to not just share these with these leaders and stakeholders, but I recommend even presenting the goals and objectives for a relevant program area. More on that in a moment. So one word I want to focus here is on relevant. So if you're going to be sharing or presenting this to a particular stakeholder, you want it to be relevant to them. So you don't want to show them the whole plan if they're only concerned with one aspect of it. So the relevant area depends on their responsibilities and interests. And in the example I'm going to do right now, I'm going to focus, that I'm going to do in a moment, I'm going to focus on that you're, meeting with your emergency services manager and getting their input on climate change related activities, because climate change is going to have impacts that that may lead to additional emergencies, things like fires and floods and stuff like that. So, in meeting with your emergency services manager, maybe you want to talk about some water related stuff as well. You may want to talk about some hazardous substances related stuff too. So maybe those are three areas that you want to focus on in your meeting with them, but um, you probably don't need to talk to them about the generals, the general program area, the education outreach program area. You may not really need to talk with them about the air quality related or the natural resources areas. So just filter all that other stuff out and just present to them the objectives and goals that are going to be of interest to them. So you want to conduct separate meetings and presentations for different areas of interest. So you don't want to present your plan to everybody all at once because people are going to want to go into more depth on particular topics. So this allows you to build relationships and get proper buy-in and investment and involvement. If you invite everybody in, all the stakeholders, all the departments, your tribal council into one meeting, we present the full plan. That could be a good idea, but the thing is because you're probably going to have to do it very quickly because you're going to cover a lot of stuff, and like you may not be able to cover stuff in depth. And then because everybody's present and your leadership's present, you may have department heads who don't want to bring up particular issues or concerns or goals because they feel like they don't have enough time, or they don't want to bring something up that may be a little more sensitive. They want to be able to talk to you about directly without having everybody in the room. So, it may be more helpful to conduct separate meetings and presentations on these different areas of interest. And I think that that's probably going to be a better way to develop relationships with other stakeholders in leadership anyways. And I mentioned, make sure, try to avoid presenting or sharing too much information at one time. So you want to filter out the non-essential. One thing I've showed you in the past was being able to filter out repetitive objectives. So if you have one objective that's repeated year in and year out, and you're sharing a document with somebody that shows the objectives, you may want to filter out the repeats in later years because it's going to make the document longer. It's going to make it harder to focus on what's really important. And you may want to filter out things like reporting or pursuing funding or doing education outreach. If those people aren't interested in those things, you may want to prepare a document that just that filters out and just shows the essential information, so you all can focus and don't get distracted or get too much into the weeds. So you want to present and share these documents and request feedback during the initial development of the ETEP strategic work plan, and also with the final drafts. So as you're developing it, I would say wait until you have like an initial full draft before kind of presenting and sharing and getting feedback. And then as you update and finalize that draft, if you want to get some just additional input, you could share the final drafts as well and just see if there's any more kind of tweaks or other feedback as well. My recommendation is when you have your ETEP strategic work plan completed and or you have drafts done, I recommend not just with your leadership and with stakeholders, but also with staff. I recommend not just sharing the document, but actually presenting it to them, because more often than not, if you email a document to somebody and ask them to give you feedback on it, you're probably not getting any feedback at all. Like it's likely, at most they'll probably open it up and scan it. I know some people will review it and give you good feedback on it, but I think it's better to, send that document to them ahead of time, but schedule a meeting. We can go through the document with them. And then that gives you a better opportunity to kind of answer questions, make sure they see everything, make sure they don't overlook everything, and make sure they actually look at the document and provide you feedback, because otherwise you may not get feedback. So, you do that during the initial development, and then you continue to do that during the implementation. So as you are revising the plan and updating the plan, it would be important to get feedback from the stakeholders on the particular areas of interest. And I recommend doing this at least on an annual basis. This will make sure that they stay informed on what's going on with your particular programs. They stay informed, they stay involved. You can maintain their support, and they may have some new, some great new ideas for how to do things, or they may see some challenges that you weren't aware of or you didn't see, and that you definitely want to be aware of as well. So I recommend that this is a process you continue to repeat over and over again, and don't see this as extra work, like beyond your job, because all this stuff, between the going back to the prior slides, the managing staff, and all this kind of communicating and gaining support, like this is your job. Like if you focus 50% of your time on managing the plan, or even just, at least 25% of your time on managing the plan in this way, you're going to get your job done, and you're going to get it done really well, and you're going to stay on track more so than if you feel like this is a distraction, this is just additional work. So uh, I think that this is critical to optimizing your office, to maximizing the success of your office, is actually following these processes that I'm going over today. And it simplifies it for you. It provides a roadmap. You don't have to guess, like what you're doing. All you do is see, okay, I just got to schedule these meetings. I got to schedule, going back here, I got to schedule my staff meetings individually and then group members. We review the plan. And then here, I just got to schedule my meetings with the various stakeholders, at least on an annual basis, during development and on an annual basis at minimum. And you do that, and you're going to see amazing results. So let me just show an example of how you can communicate this kind of clearly and effectively. So one thing is you're probably not going to want to share the Excel document. Most people aren't crazy about getting an Excel document and have to sort through it. Excel can be intimidating to some people as well, so you want to keep that in mind. So I did show you this before. I'm going to show you again. Would be to put this into a Word document. Let's say you're meeting with the example I talked about before. Let's say you're meeting with your emergency services manager on the climate change objectives. So you're in the process of developing your plan, or it's a meeting, it's a year two meeting. You're talking about revising and updating the plan. It's really the same exact process. So let's filter this plan out just to focus on climate related stuff. So let's see, let's filter this out. Let's go here down to the objectives and filter it out so you're just focused on climate change. And as I mentioned, if you were just using the paper version of this document, then you don't have the ability to filter, but your document should already be separated by program area anyways. Okay, so you only want to share the information that they're going to be concerned with. So it's really just these first two rows, the program area, the staffing, all that stuff isn't as important, isn't as necessary. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to open up a Word document right here. Let's see, let's just change the layout of this to make it landscape format. And I'm going to paste that right here. So now we have this all in one document right here. There's a lot of spacing here. There's ways to adjust the spacing. I showed you before, and actually in a separate video, you're gonna see a better way to do this, so you get it, so that the things are spaced out a little better. So these are a little too narrow. So you have this in landscape format. There's ways to get it to these, so these aren't as actually wide as they are. But actually, let's go back. I mentioned filtering out the unnecessary or the repetitive objectives. So in this case, I have a column for objectives that say repeat or not. If you scroll down here, there are a couple that are repetitive. So this annually reviewing and updating your ETEP strategic work plan, doing annual education outreach, that's repetitive, securing funding, staff training. So these are all repetitive activities that you'd want to filter out. So right here, let's say if it says yes, that it's a repeat. Oops, let's actually filter that out, not in. So we only want the blanks here. I'm going to just shrink these guys down a little bit just so they, okay, so let's redo that. So let's filter these things again. Climate change. Climate change. Let's go here. Climate change. and then climate here as well. So we're just going to do the boxes themselves, the first two rows. Let's go back to our Word document. Let's paste this in here. And then in this case, this is, make this a little bit wider. Let's get more room on the sheet. Okay, so, now we have a 3-page document. We can sit down with our emergency services manager and discuss all the climate change implications, things that they may be interested in. So here we have in 2016 that we're supposed to be conducting a climate change vulnerability and risk assessment. I think your emergency services person probably should have some pretty good information related to that. They already may have some information prepared. You probably want them to review what you prepare for this document as well. And then, the following year, I believe it says develop an adaptation preparedness plan as well. So, they're kind of key point, you might be able to get through this more quickly, but you can focus on the most important things. If you submit this to them ahead of time, you can turn on track changes and they can go through here and they can say, they could add activities. Let's say they want us, or they can make some notes. They can say, this is, there is a fire risk, just something simple like that. So they can make changes, they can make notes in it as well. You can print this out, have this available at the meeting. Everybody's on the same page. And, as I mentioned, there's ways to filter out more information they may not be concerned with. There may be other areas that they're concerned with as well. So you can quickly modify that document to just focus on what you want. If you're using the Word-based version, then you're not going to have quite that flexibility. You just kind of bring in copies of the plans themselves. You may choose to edit them a little bit to make them a little easier to review as well. So, this you can send both electronically and by print, and track pretty easily, and it's in a format that somebody else can kind of use and manage. Okay, so another important thing is, let's go back here and let's undo a lot of this stuff. Let's bring the document back to its original state. Okay, let's get out of there. All right, so the next slides focus on, this is particularly helpful for departmental decision making. So you want to utilize your ETEP strategic work plan in particular, if not your full ETEP, to evaluate and prioritize objectives. So this could include some new or proposed objectives and to evaluate the current objectives as well. So when a new objective is proposed, you want to consider, does it align with does it align with one or more of our goals? If it does, then you want to proceed with additional considerations. If you are considering a new objective and it doesn't align with any of the goals, then you either need probably to not pursue that objective or considering adding a new applicable goal. And you don't want to necessarily just add goals willy-nilly. Remember, your goals are your long-term goals that are guiding your full department. So you don't want to, just because you have a new objective, like you don't want to add a goal just for that objective. You want to make sure that it is truly something you want to pursue. So don't necessarily just add goals just because you find, a new, I guess a new shiny objective is how I'm gonna phrase it. If it doesn't seem to be in line with everything else that your department is doing. You also want to consider what year the objective should be pursued in. So you have to decide, is this objective time sensitive? Does it have a deadline? Is there some type of serious impact that's occurring right now? Did the chairperson just come in my office and scream at me about it? Or ask nicely about it? Whatever it is. And you also want to, which year, in deciding which year to pursue it, you need to consider what resources that are actually available. So we went through before managing staff time. You want to make sure that if you're going to be adding an objective in a particular year, that you actually, your staff have sufficient time to work on it. I didn't populate the plan with this, but you could also consider the available funding on an objective by objective basis, but just in general, does this fit under one of the current or proposed funding sources as well? And also, just be, you don't need to pursue every single objective in this year or the upcoming year. You have a plan, a 4 to 5 year plan. So you want to select the best year over the next 4 to 5 years of when to pursue that particular objective. And for some objectives, there may be a series. So, in this plan, there's a series of climate change related objectives. So let's go here and talk about climate change. Let's filter, let's clear these. Let's make this a little, oh. And I unfortunately went through and to re-hide some of these columns. So let's hide this. We don't need to look at the staff responsibilities as much anymore. So let's go to climate change. Now in this case, there's conductive climate change vulnerability and risk assessment 2016. In 2017, the vulnerability and risk assessment will help you develop a climate change adaptation and preparedness plan. So there's a sequence there. You could do both at the same time, but you wouldn't necessarily develop your climate change adaptation and preparedness plan before conducting the vulnerability risk assessment. So those two couldn't necessarily be flip-flopped. And then you're not going to implement the plan, which is a 2018 activity, until you actually develop the plan. So, there's a logical flow to these activities. And if it doesn't fit within the next 4 to 5 years, or it's some type of good idea that you just want to keep track of, then you can list it as a possible activity. And I do have that in this as well. So let's scroll down the bottom and then see down here we have a couple different possible activities. So on the climate change front, I have as possible activity that you could do greenhouse gas emissions tracking. And so, or it's just a future activity. So here I have update and review the climate change adaptation preparedness plan at least once every 5 years. If that's, you just saw that schedule for 2017, and if that review is supposed to occur every 5 years, then it's not going to fit within the 4-year plan. But you do want to keep it on your radar and consider it every year, so that when, if 2017, I think it's going to be 2021 or 2022, would be when then you updated 2022 to 2023 would be when you'd update the plan. You'd want to make sure that when that year rolls around, that you actually keep that on your radar and you insert it into the plan as 2023. When you get to that point, you're not necessarily there right now, so you leave it as a possible activity. Okay, so, and then, when you do, you want to review and evaluate your possible objectives on an annual basis. So, as you're doing that annual review, we'll talk about more your annual review in a moment. As each year comes and goes, you'll look at the update of your climate change adaptation and preparedness plan and consider whether this is the appropriate, whether it's appropriate to incorporate into the plan with a firm year. And then assign that year if and when appropriate. So I want to run through, that this all may seem pretty abstract. So I want to run through a few different examples of how you can use this plan for decision-making purposes. So the first one is a new grant opportunity comes up. So, and I actually just learned this. I just instructed the ETEP's Integrated Solid Waste Management Plan in Palm Springs. Went really well. And during that course, we were talking about funding opportunities for waste management related activities. And one of the EPA people there mentioned that that there's going to be EPA hazardous waste grants actually going to be available for funding. The FOA, the funding opportunity announcement, is going to be released within the next few weeks or so. If you are, that's something, this is all very hypothetical, that this could or could, that is true, it's happening. This is obviously April right now, April 2016, so if you're watching this video in the future, it won't be true. But let's just say hypothetically, you want to pursue this grant. You didn't know about it. This particular funding opportunity has not been available for the past couple of years, so it wasn't on your radar, and you have you have a transfer station and you actually want to develop some capacity at that transfer station to be able to store and dispose of household hazardous waste. Right now, you don't have that capacity, so you learn about this grant and you think this could be a great opportunity to get some funding to somehow work on that. So either develop a feasibility study or possibly, I think it's only for planning related activities, but maybe it's for implementation activities. Maybe you get some initial funding for equipment and supplies for, a shed or a containment area to store this stuff. But anyway, so you want to pursue this new grant opportunity. Um, so then you go to your plan. Let's unfilter this stuff. You're going to go to your plan and actually, let's see. Let's go to the top of the plan. Okay, so you're going to go to your plan and you got to think about, okay, who would be involved in this particular activity. So, this is 2016, so we just want to look at 2016. It's hazardous waste. It's not going to involve your water quality specialist or your air quality specialist, but your environmental technician does operate the transfer station, so they're likely going to be involved. Your environmental director probably is going to be involved in preparing the grant proposal, and your administrative assistant. So you may want to, run your pivot table, look at your pivot table report to see where you're at, and see that, well, your environmental, as of right now, the environmental director actually has a year and a quarter's worth of responsibilities. Your environmental technician has 1.14 years worth of responsibilities. Your administrative assistant has some flexibility as well. So but if this is something you definitely want to pursue, then you have to go over here and you have to decide, okay, well, amongst these responsibilities, which ones are going to delete? So if it's primarily going to be the environmental technician that's going to write this, then we want to look at their responsibilities. Let's remove the blanks and just see what they're doing this year. Amongst other 2016 activities, what maybe can we reallocate less time for? So let's see. Maybe there's some funding, maybe there's some time already allocated toward it. So let's scroll down here. Is there anything about them pursuing grant funding? Develop a combined annual funding plan. So right now there's no pursuit of funding for the waste management area under here. So this means that we're going to have to review these activities and decide if we want to do something in the following year. So let's, right here, line number 63, in 2016, we're supposed to be conducting a composting operation feasibility studies for the tribal transfer station. So let's say that this was going to be tribally funded, and this is something that we think we could possibly push back or only do partially. So as of right now, your environmental technicians will spend 240 hours. We have to estimate how many hours they're going to spend on the grant proposal. So let's say 40 hours. So we can move this down to 200 hours. But they're still kind of overworked as well. So let's scale it back even more. Let's just say they're going to spend 120 hours. Let's free up a lot of time for them. And then let's give them, we can now add an activity here. So 2016, apply for hazardous waste grant, waste funding. And then, you can allocate time right here. So let's say, we think it's going to take them 80 hours. So your environmental technician actually has good writing skills, and so you want your administrative assistant to actually, let's say, your administrative assistant is going to spend a good amount of time helping as well. So we're going to give them 40 hours. 2080. And then, as a director, you're going to kind of just review the plan. So you feel like you can get away with maybe just 8 hours on the project. Little guidance, little review, and the primary responsibility is your environmental technician. So let's go back here. Let's refresh this and see that, okay, we got our environmental technician's work years down some. Administrative assistant still has extra work years as well. So you can be like, well, you know what? We think that the administrative assistant could actually spend more time on this, and maybe let's reduce the environmental technician's time. So the environmental technician will provide the information. Your administrative assistant is the better writer, so they're going to spend 80 hours on this. So we can go back here, adjust the pivot table, fresh. And then, so that's, this is one way you kind of decide about whether you can pursue something. And it might have been where you actually pushed back the composting thing to 2017. So let's say instead you move this to 2017, and then you actually deleted these responsibilities. This will be their responsibility next year. Let's update the plan. And then this looks a little bit better. Your environmental technician is closer to 1 full work year. And that's how you make make a decision on whether to pursue that particular opportunity. So another example would be, let's say there's another grant opportunity you're considering, the Department of Energy Tribal Energy Grant. So in this case, I'm actually going to go back here and talk about the considerations. So you're not just considering, the time and availability, you also want to be considering your goals. So you have a transfer station. It's pretty clear that, having household hazardous waste was in line with your goals. But let's see, let's open up another document. So we have our strategic plan sample, and this has some example goals in it as well. These same goals are actually in this document as well. So in this case, you can go up and look at your goals and say, you know what, these are all our goals. Does pursuing a tribal energy program grants, and let's say, when you saw this grant opportunity, you were thinking renewable energy, does this fit under any of these goals? So, doesn't really, maybe fits under the air one. Doesn't really fit under climate change adaptation. Climate change mitigation, it may fit because it includes this focus on minimizing greenhouse gas emissions. So you want to evaluate these goals and think, decide whether this really aligns with them strongly enough. It's renewable energy obviously is in support of those things, but you may want to have a separate series of goals focused just on energy or renewable energy. You also need to make sure you have the staff time and all that as well. So in this case, you do that evaluation and decide that, really the climate change related stuff is more focused on planning and habitat related things as of right now. Like, we're not ready to kind of jump into the greenhouse gas emissions mitigation. We just don't feel like we have the appropriate staff for to focus on renewable energy. So that's something we're not going to pursue right now. So another thing that may come up is the discovery of an illegal dump. So now you're kind of the back of the environmental technician down here as well, and you got to, it was a illegal dump was just discovered, and you have to decide whether and how this fits in. So, whether you're going to do an enforcement action on it, whether you need to clean it up, whether you need to do some education outreach, but you also need to figure out the urgency. So going back to these considerations, the time sensitivity, the seriousness of the impact is something you want to consider. So if it's just, a little, let's say it was just discovered, but it looks like it's been there for a while. So it's discovered in the middle of the woods. It was actually at an old campground. Kids used to go there. They used to kind of party and stuff. They threw a bunch of trash. Sometimes brought out other junk as well. They're riding around dirt bikes and quads and stuff like that. But there, it was just discovered. It was, for some reason, you didn't know about it before. And the kids aren't really doing that anymore. Like, the tribe's developed some good educational programs that kind of keeps them away from doing these types of things, trashing these places. So it may be that it's not presenting any type of imminent threat. So actually investigating that, you may want to move to 2017. So, you add in something here for 2017 would be to conduct waste assessment of, so why illegal dump site. It might be that you want to actually do the cleanup as well. So you conduct a waste assessment, develop a cleanup and closure plan, and actually do all that. So Anyway, so that seems like something that you can move to 2017, but you'd want to evaluate the other 2017 objectives to see whether you have whether those work or not. But you don't have to, it's more important that you make sure you're not overworking yourself for this year. If it is something that you're considering for 2017, then you also have to consider in this year if we're going to be pursuing funding to do that. And if you don't feel like you don't feel like, you've already applied for all your 2017 funding, you don't think you get any more for it, then you may need to push it back to 2018. Okay, so another example would be if you had a directive by the tribal chair to investigate a CRV collection area that may have some additional urgency. So you may want to then force that into the plan somewhere. Another possibility, another example could be that one of your staff members, let's say your water quality specialist, came up with an idea to develop a wildlife and habitat protection law because a lot of people's properties are bordering a creek or a river, and they seem to be destroying riparian habitat that's leading up to the creek, and so there needs to be a law to prevent that. So that may have higher urgency, or it might be something where you're just like, you know what, that's like among all the things we have going on, it just is, don't think it's something we can pursue right now. Well, let's I don't know when or where it can fit in the plan, but let's at least keep it on our radar. So in this case, you would add it as a, let's unfilter all this stuff, clear these filters. We can go and just sort the small stars, let's go to the bottom. We'll add it as a possible activity to keep it on our radar. This way, if your staff come up with an idea, a good idea, that you can't necessarily commit to right now, but you enter it into the plan as a possible activity, they feel heard, they feel valued, they feel like, okay, I came up with an idea and it's going to be considered, at least on an annual basis, to be evaluated whether we should pursue it for funding or not. So develop a wildlife and habitat protection ordinance. So you add that in there, you put natural resources, and then you're going to put, regulating. So now this is in your plan, and you'll consider it on an annual basis. So one thing that will be particularly helpful for you on an annual basis is actually utilizing this to prepare your grant work plans. So in this slide, I've just listed kind of some particular ways in which you can use what's already in your ETEP strategic work plan to populate your grant work plan. So the goals that you have in this plan may be appropriate to put for long-term outcomes in your grant work plan. Your objectives could either be inserted as intermediate outcomes or specific commitments. And then there's additional elements too in your ETEP strategic work plan that you could incorporate. So, your program description might be something that you can include. Your component title could be the program area, and actually I have this backwards, should be, the program area in your ETEP strategic work plan could be the component title, and your grant work plan, you might have a due date already listed. You may have put outputs and deliverables in your ETEP strategic work plan. So some of these are optional. The first two are not. These ones down here are optional. So if you've already populated the staff responsibilities and the estimated work years, estimated costs, then you can easily move these things over. And I've had some examples of tribes who have already done that quite successfully, and they've said it's made their lives so much easier when they're developing their grant work plan. So let me just show you a quick example of how to do this, or how you could do this. So I created a little, let's see, example work plan. So I created an example work plan that has some of the common information that you'll see. Our current ETEP strategic work plan doesn't have outputs or deliverables or end dates or estimated costs. So that would be additional information you need to develop. But for the sake of this, I know it says GAP. Let's just say this is a Clean Water Act 106 work plan. So in this case, we're developing our Clean Water Act 106 work plan for fiscal year 17-18. And so we're going to go here. Let's filter out So really, let's see. The water-related activities are going to fall under natural resources and water. So let's review those activities and let's just look at 2017, what we have planned right now. And so, we're just going to focus on one component. Let's say that this component is going to be your uh, water quality monitoring. Okay, so if it requires a description, the descriptions up here are a bit broader than just for specific ones. So you may need to write that out yourself. But it's usually a pretty brief thing. You probably can use your prior work plans. I mean, I know some you have all this information. The Clean Water Act 106 is actually something that you don't have to change from year to year. GAP is something which this will be even more helpful for, but I just wanted to give like a more simplified example. So now let's find some long-term goals. So in here, you may list some of your long-term goals. So minimizing or eliminating point source pollution impacts on surface waters might be one of the long-term outcomes that you want to insert into here. So let's say maybe you have more than one. Minimize, eliminate non-point source pollution as well. So these are two goals that are relevant to water quality monitoring. And then you may have some intermediate outcomes that you insert as well. And then you have your commitments. So going down here, conduct quarterly water quality monitoring pursuant to QAP. Like that's pretty straightforward activity. You may want to have more detail, obviously, but than that. But it might be sufficient. You may want to You may want to specify the these particular constituents you're monitoring for. So in this case, in this hypothetical plan, actually in 2016 it stated that the tribe was going to update their QAP, and in that year they were not yet doing benthic macroinvertebrate studies. So this is actually a new activity. So in this case, doing an annual BMI benthic macroinvertebrate study is actually a new activity that you want to insert and allocate resources for as well. Let's go back here. Let's see. So related to water quality monitoring would be preparing your annual water quality monitoring assessment report. Let's go to this guy. Let's put this in here as well. And so that may be the three tasks that probably have. There's probably data. There should be a data one related in here as well. So as I mentioned, this is just a example plan. Normally this would have data, so you'd enter data and to store it. You'd organize and analyze your data. So there may be a few more on here as well, but there's education outreach related stuff. There's pursuing funding, so applying for water related funding may be something you want to include into your plan as well. Developing a non-point source assessment reports might be something that you include in your 106 grants or your 319, depending on if you have 319 or not. But so that's how you can kind of quickly populate it. And then as you're going through the process of preparing that, you may then start to consider, okay, well, what are the primary staff responsibilities for these things? In all of these cases, this is going to be the water quality specialist. So let's populate this for the water quality specialist. And now let's start estimating their work years for each of these activities as well. So over here we have water quality monitoring, quarterly water quality monitoring. Let's say that takes them, I don't know, equals each time they do it, it takes them about 16 hours times 4 times over 2080. So you have 0.3 work years. Let's just say maybe that's an underestimate. Maybe it actually takes them more like 3 days total. So 0.4 work years. So you go through that process of populating this, and then you can run a pivot table and see the total work years. And you can insert that as well. You can insert the funding and stuff like that too. So you already have a lot of the information you need for your work plans in here. It's going to make that process a lot easier. And then as you're developing that, you can then evaluate so you kind of do this simultaneously. You evaluate the changes that you want to make to your water program area while preparing this work plan. So you're not doing this 2 separate times. So you're not you'll work out the work years and the primary staff responsibilities and the budget and stuff like that all while updating the plan as opposed to doing it on two separate occasions. Or if you just do it in this first, then you may just, then it may be a lot easier to populate. You may already have all this information already ready to just put into your plan. So as I mentioned, there's kind of a lot of optional categories over here that I did not flesh out. So there's, beyond work years, you may have already done estimated costs as well. And so, I think that can be particularly helpful for you. All right, so then there's the process of reviewing and updating your ETEP strategic work plan and your strategic plan. So I'm going to go through those one at a time. All right, just a quick drink of water. So you want to be, you could be reviewing your ETEP strategic work plan and updating it on an ongoing basis. I would say you definitely want to review it annually. So I kind of showed some examples where you're meeting with your staff members or their stakeholders and you're making adjustments to the plan on the fly as appropriate. And then, so that's like ones you're probably making for the current year and maybe the next year. You're not making updates to the full plan. You will want to review and update the full plan on an annual basis. And as you're doing this, you'll want to be adding, removing, and revising objectives. And you're also going to be considering those possible objectives as well. So you can be evaluating those and considering whether to incorporate those into the plan. It's also a good time to kind of add, remove, and revise goals. These are, more set in stone. I mean, they can be changed, but they're long-term overarching goals. They shouldn't be changed significantly on an annual basis. Something like controlling, reducing, and eliminating on and off reservation outdoor air quality pollution is something that's probably not going to change as a goal, but you want to at least review it and make sure that as you are adding, removing, and revising objectives, that they are in alignment with those goals. And then you also want to go through your strategic plan as well. You want to review that and update it, I would say, on an annual basis. At minimum, you may kind of tweak it. It could be accompanied by an annual strategic planning retreat, or you can choose to, do that less frequently. I would say you definitely want to review your strategic plan at least on an annual basis. But let me show you some examples of how to review and update your ETEP strategic work plan. So let's go back here and let's go to the objectives. So, the examples I was providing before showed you what kind of making adjustments on the fly or when you're in development look like. So in this case, let's go back here. Let's just sort this back the way I like it. So let's sort these from A to Z. Let's sort these from smallest to largest. Okay, so when you're reviewing and updating this on an annual basis, you want to be you're going to first start with 2016 and archiving what's been done in 2016. So you can go through the activities in 2016 and figure out what's been done and what hasn't been done. So starting here, you can go through the objectives one by one. Right here, conducting the indoor air quality assessment, preparing a report, and developing indoor air quality management plan. So let's say you got the indoor air quality assessment and report done, but you didn't develop the indoor air quality management plan. Okay, so first of all, you have to decide whether you're going to do the indoor air quality management plan in 2017. So let's say you do have the funding to do so, something where your air quality specialist just got additional responsibilities, didn't have time. So you have GAP funds or Clean Water Act 103, or Clean Air Act 103 funds that can be rolled over to 2017. So we're going to say that you're going to develop the indoor air quality management plan in the following year. So let's change that. Put this in 2017. So you populate the rest of it as well. I'm not going to do that right now. You did accomplish this. So in this scenario, we are at the end of 2016 or the beginning of 2017. So at this point, you don't really you don't want or need 2016 objectives in the plan anymore. So you're going to cut these things out, and you can have an archive sheet where you can paste this in here. So then you go back here if you want to keep track of it. Another thing is you could do is just delete it. I think it makes more sense to keep track of it. I'm a little bit of a hoarder too, so I like to see what I've accomplished, and it's particularly helpful. So you delete that, you change this to 2017. Okay, so you'll do that for each objective. You'll archive it. So as you go through it, you will have no more 2016 objectives in this plan. They'll either be archived or they'll have been moved to a different year or possible or deleted. You'll delete one if you decide, you know what, it just doesn't make sense for us anymore. We're never going to pursue that. Let's just delete it from our plan, and then you remove it. So you do that one by one for 2016. Then you need to go to 2017, 18, and 19. So this is a 4-year plan, and you need to make adjustments to each of those. So in this case, developing the indoor air quality management plan was moved to 2017. In 2018, let's just see. So if this was a real plan, there would probably be an objective in here that you'd be implementing that plan in 2017. So if that was the case and that was in the plan, then in 2018 you would shift that. So, let's just say instead of develop, we have, so hypothetically, let's just say, begin pilot implementation of indoor air quality management plan. So let's just say originally this was listed for 2017. Well, now that we're not developing the plan in 2017, we're going to move the pilot implementation in 2018. And then let's say that the kind of ongoing implementation was already listed for 2017 or 2018. So, this would be continue implementation. So let's say this originally said 2018, but because we're doing the pilot implementation 2018, then we'd move that to 2019. Not 2109, 2019. Okay, so you're going to make adjustments so you're going to go through everything for 2017 and 18. You're going to make adjustments for all of those. So another example of that would be, climate change. Let's say that you have it to do a vulnerability and risk assessment in 2016. And in this case, let's just say that you're a quality specialist. You lost your air quality specialist. They went to another job. It took you 6 months to hire another one. You're in a remote location, so it's challenging to hire new staff members. So you weren't able to accomplish this in 2017. So you're going to push that back to 2018. Because you weren't able to do the climate change vulnerability and risk assessment until then, now you can't do the adaptation plan until 2018. You're already behind. So now you're going to adjust that as well. And then you adjust the implementation for that too. Okay, so you make all these adjustments, and now you want, as I mentioned, you want a perpetual 4-year plan. So on top of doing all that, you're now going to start adding activities for 2020 so that you do have a 4-year plan. So in this case, you move developing the preparedness plan 2018. Because of that, you then begin implementation. Had to be moved to 2019. Where is it? So okay, so right here you're going to move that to 2019, and then continue implementation would be moved to 2020 because that's the first year you're actually kind of doing regular ongoing implementation as well. So and then you may have lots of other new activities that you're going to do too. So you're going to host a tribal climate change forum. Okay, so that's a new activity that you plan on doing in 2000, and that's way in the future. So 2020, and then you also then want to go and look at all of your possible activities and decide whether these make sense. So you want to review these at least on an annual basis. So does it make sense? Do we want to start developing greenhouse gas emissions tracking system and database? Are we due to update our any of our plans? Are we going to review and update our vulnerability and risk assessment? So in this case, we're going to say no for all these. I mean, our air quality specialist left, but then you may have other possible activities. So in this case, you look at, the idea of developing a wildlife and habitat protection ordinance. Well, now that makes sense. Let's insert it in the plan. Let's put it in 2020, or let's put it in 2019. So you review all your possible activities and decide whether to put these in too. So you reorganize, you resort. Now your plan is 2017 through 2020, and all of your 2016 activities are either archived or been revised or deleted. So that's the process of updating your plan, and that makes sure that you're all, everybody's on the same page on an ongoing basis. And then when you're reviewing these things, you got to make sure that you're reviewing them, your goals and objectives as you're considering new goals, making sure you're reviewing your objectives to make sure that these things are in line with your goals. So if they're not in line with that, then you need to reconsider the objective or the goals. Okay, so you do that on an annual basis, and like if you follow the whole process that I just went through, if you not just reviewing and updating, but everything. So let's just go back here real quick and rehash this. It's a few minutes over. I will. So right here, if you're these steps right here, if you're viewing and tracking these things, you're using them to manage your staff responsibilities. So you're meeting individually with staff and reviewing these, and in groups, you're reviewing this plan with them. You're using the plan to communicate and gain support from stakeholders and leadership. You're using this plan to guide your decision-making processes. You're using it to prepare your gap and grant work plans, and you're reviewing and updating it on a regular basis. Like this is something where this is legitimately 25% of your work, but this is going to make everything you do that much more efficient and effective. So I highly advocate, your plan is only as good as the effort you put into implementing and utilizing it. So it's critical that you spend enough time, use this plan. Use this plan as a strategic planning and management tool, to help your office be great, help it excel, help everybody get on the same page, take out the mystery of like what's going on, who's doing what, eliminate the excess waste of time, of funding, of spending too much time on side projects or things that are not in alignment. And this isn't to say this is what your staff is doing. This is from the level of the director to down to administrative assistant and environmental technician and field workers. This helps everybody get on the same page, and it'll generate excitement. If everybody's involved in this, they'll get more excited. They'll be more bought in, and so this can be an extremely, extremely powerful tool. Okay, so next steps, you won't have a doodle poll. Continue preparing your ETEP if you're still working on it. That's the information review, recording your findings, actually preparing the framework document, your strategic work plan. The strategic planning questionnaire that I submitted to you through SurveyMonkey is still available. That's available to you to do. And then I will send a follow-up email soon. So please do, I'm going to end in just a moment. Please complete the evaluation after I'm done. I appreciate it. Hopefully this has been helpful for you, and hopefully you take this and you run with it, and you transform your office, because I really believe that if you take the time to do all this, you will transform your office for the better. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in Module 8.